These painters, these truly great artists, were hired to do commercial work, sometimes at a breakneck pace. I mean, you would have a Rockwell, which is probably the one we remember the most, Norman Rockwell, doing Saturday evening post covers. But he had to turn those around so fast that many times the paintings were still wet when he would deliver them to be photographed for publication. But the reason it was the golden age of illustration, just as it was the golden age of editorial cartooning, is because there were so many employers for people like me. You know, there were, dozens and dozens of periodicals and magazines that needed illustrators and employed these great artists to make a living wage during the 20s, the 30s, and on. I mean, it sort of petered out with time. This kind of illustration became a little passé, and probably pretty expensive. But there were 2,000 staff editorial cartoonists in 1920. Today there are 40. So Chattanooga has 1/40th. Cartoonists left in this country. It kind of makes you feel important. Or pitiful, one of the two, I'm not sure. But whenever I go into any subject, I do exhaustive research because I'm curious about all things. He was one of Harvey Dunn's students. His name is Harold von Schmidt. Just an interesting aside, his son was also an artist and a folk artist, a folk singer who Bob Dylan actually cited as one of his chief influences. So Eric von Schmidt, Harvey von Schmidt's son, was quite an artist himself. But Harold was quite accomplished. He's in the National Illustrator Hall of Fame. He's in the National Cowboy Hall of Fame for all of the art he did about the Old West. This one was not about the Old West. It was not about the military, two of von Schmidt's favorite topics. But it was about a story that I didn't know exactly what it was. And so in order to kind of judge the painting and maybe ask myself, why the artist made certain decisions he did in illustrating the story the way he did, I had to find the story. I wrote this, the guy who wrote this book, and he wasn't responding. And my wife finally said, what's the name of that painting again? And what year, Cosmo? And I said, oh, come on, I've been looking for it for 2 weeks. There's no way you're going to find it, geez. And so 10 minutes later, I hear this voice from the top of our apartment going, I found it! And it was Cindy Croce, my wife, and an awesome painter in her own right, had found this story. It was written by Rebecca West, a socialist feminist from the 20s, and it was a story called The Magician on Pell Street. And I would venture to guess that probably most of the writers for Cosmopolitan and similar magazines at the time were not women.
Actually, I did a little research on it.
And there's my wonderful wife.
So, during the golden age of illustration,
We didn't have this planned at all, did we? I promise you.
approximately 5 American illustrators who were women. There were probably that many also that were English. But I noticed something in doing this research, something really interesting. So you have the premier one was Jessie Wilcox Smith. She was from Philadelphia. She did Good Housekeeping, including Mother Goose series of illustrations, and she created all the covers from 1915 to 1933. Then you have Sarah Stillwell Weber. She was from Concord, Pennsylvania. She illustrated 60 covers from the Saturday Evening Post. You have Elizabeth Green, who was from Philadelphia. She was publishing before she was 18. Rose O'Neill, she was from Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania. She created the Cupid character that became the Cupid doll. So then there was also Violet Oakley. So she wasn't born in Philly, but she died in Pennsylvania.
This morning I was hustling, trying to finish the story. And because I wanted to be well informed. You don't have to have read the story. In fact, Von Schmidt himself said that he learned from Harvey Dunn and other instructors that when you approach an illustration, it's not essential to illustrate the story. But what's more important is to create a piece of art that stands on its own.
I'm going to go very far afield here.
Good.
Do we know for a fact that from the artist that the gentleman has done something wrong?
We don't.
Okay. Well, from my perspective from here, the immediate image that I saw with the two central figures, I wonder if the artist was inspired at all by the Pietà, because that's exactly this image that I received here.
You heard the collective ah there, right? Yeah. That's like, you're smart. Of course, you know, it's of the version, it's of Mary holding Christ's body.
Right.
And surely, you know, I think that obviously the analogy is a good one. You know, it certainly looks like that. And from reading the story, it might ring true. But you know, so they were from different worlds. You know, he was sort of a country boy, and she was sort of a city gal. So, in fact, she was a professional dancer. And she fell head over heels for this guy. They didn't seem like they would be two peas in a pod at all. In fact, they seemed like complete opposites. But she just loved him with a passion that burned like a supernova. But he figured out that she was crazy, you know, and he jilted her. He left her, went back to England, left her in New York, heartbroken and alone. And so maybe that's what he needed to be forgiven for, jilting a woman who loved him so dearly. But maybe not. Because she was so lovesick and so despondent after he left her that she sought revenge. And she went into the city, she went to Chinatown, she found the magician on Pell Street and had him put a curse on her ex-lover so that he would die. And the magician obliged for $95. Which was a big sum of money back in 1926, let me tell you. So the magician told her, okay, within a year, he'll die. He'll start to lose weight, and doctors won't be able to find anything wrong with him. And in a year, he'll be dead. And she said, great. Awesome. He deserves it. So anyway, she goes back to work as a dancer, and one of her shows takes her to London, where she's sitting in her hotel waiting to do her act. And who happens in but her ex-lover, who immediately runs to her. He says, I am so sorry for leaving you. I just bought boat passage back to New York City so that I could come and win you back. And she's going, oh shit. What have I done? You know, she was so happy this guy came begging her to take her back, or take him back. And then she remembered, well, damn, he's going to be dead in a year, you know. So anyway, she kind of forgets it. They get married. They run off, you know, to the English countryside. And then he starts coughing. And she starts to, like, time his coughing. And each day it gets progressively worse. And each day she starts to notice that he's losing an amazing amount of weight. You know, dozens of pounds a month are dripping off this guy. And she goes, oh my God, I got to get back to New York. I got to pay off the magician to take this curse off the guy. Well, that's all I'll say. But they do that. And, you know, she kind of figures out that, and that's where the story kind of falls apart. It's really going like gangbusters up to then, and then it just all falls apart. So she goes back to New York. She finds the magician. He's in this terrible state, and she figures out the whole thing was just a sham, that he wasn't a magician at all, that she has nothing to worry about. But I think that son of a gun's a dead man, you know, by somebody's hand. Either her own magic or the Pell Street magician magic or something was going on. Because I actually think this scene takes place after the story ends. I think it's when they go to Florida, after, you know, they leave New York. And I think, he looks pretty skinny there to me, and he certainly doesn't look well. Why did the artist make this particular decision to illustrate a story like that? As an illustrator myself, I would have picked this woman wandering through this back alley in Chinatown. It was certainly one of the pivotal scenes in the book with you know, Chinese grocery stores and tea rooms and a magician, you know, and it was just this confluence of cultures going on, you know, but this was what von Schmidt chose to highlight in this story, which is kind of interesting because he was sort of going beyond the story, and he was known to have read all the stories he illustrated. He was pretty diligent that way.
Now, you're one of the only remaining artists in the country, not you specifically, but you and 39 others, who operate under that same kind of deadline every day, you know, so maybe you can speak to that.
You know, I finished my cartoon at 4:52, and I was supposed to be here at 5 o'clock. And I would have spent another hour and a half on it had I, you know, had a chance. But yeah, you know, deadlines are crushers, and so I think a lot of these paintings look a little bit sort of a little more dashed off than others. Some of them seem more fully realized, and some seem more like studies almost. But I think sometimes deadlines and time came into play. I say that not knowing, but I could probably do research on all of these paintings and find out.
I would be really interested to know what process you go through to come up with the ideas for your points that you want to illustrate.
Nicotine and caffeine usually is the process. But I've been doing this for so long, I mean, you know, 35 years or more, and so, yeah, you know, it's sort of a magical, mystical thing, sort of like the magician on Pell Street in a real way. I don't really want to figure out where ideas come from because, you know, it's kind of like a magic trick. When you know the magic, it loses some of its amazement, and you know, maybe it'll stop, you know. So I just sort of come in each day and there's an empty sheet of paper and I'm supposed to fill it up before I go home that night. Some days more successfully than others, most days less successfully than others, but you know, it's a matter of over time. It's not your best work that really symbolizes how good you're getting. It's your worst work. And so it's you know, over time, my worst cartoons are a lot better than they were 20 years ago. And the valleys aren't nearly so long and they aren't nearly so deep as they used to be. So, you know, a blind pig's going to find an acorn every now and again, if that's the expression. A truffle. I don't know. They find some, blind pigs find something every now and again.
How many newspapers do you read?
Do I read? Well, that could change from day to day. I read, you know, New York Times, Washington Post, Chattanooga Times Free Press. It depends on the story. I mean, you know, it's sort of, you go where the story takes you, and sometimes the best stories are in The Guardian, maybe in London, or some, you know, maybe the Chicago Tribune one day, who knows? But every day it's sort of the New York Times and Washington Post, you know, all the good liberal newspapers. But I wish I could tell you a better answer about how I get my ideas. But it's sort of a, you know, okay, so you go to the shrink's office, right? You know, it's something I know, maybe not all of you. But they do that word association thing, right? You know, tell me the first word that pops into your brain when you hear, you know, black, white, you know, big, little, you know, whatever. It's sort of a visual version of that. So when I'm looking at issues of any kind, I start thinking of objects or symbols or images that are related to that issue. Healthcare, you might think of stethoscopes or hypodermic needles or, you know, those IV bags or, you know, gurneys or ambulances, whatever. And then you start to play around with those particular images because they already sort of communicate what you're talking about to your readers, which is healthcare. And that's sort of how you get started. Sometimes phrases or quotes will help you. Donald Trump, you know, will help you. I mean, my only regret now is I can't leave him alone. You know, I want to move on to other things. I think we all really want to.